Hey guys, so you've seen a Heaven Studio and the amazing custom remixes that people are making. Well, today we're going to take a basic look at the editor so you can start making your own custom remixes, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to know and all the basic knowledge you need to start making your own remixes in the editor. So it's really simple, but there's obviously a lot of options on the screen. And so we're just going to go over what every button does and how to start using the interface, just getting comfortable with it. And you can see the editor is really split into two halves. You have the top half, which is sort of like where all of your attributes and options are. You also have your list of games that you can use. And then you have the bottom half, which is your timeline, and this is where you will actually compose the arrangement of your remix. So we'll go over everything, but we'll start at the top here. You have the new option. If you want to start a new remix, it will overwrite your current one. So you have control open. This is where you can open up a remix. And what's cool about this is you can open anyone's remix. You can see I have a lot of random RIQ files in my downloads, and these are all Heaven Studio remixes. So I could just open one up and see what that creator did to make their level. But then we can just go back to new and it's back to being an empty canvas. And then of course, most importantly, you have the save option. You'll want to take care to save your projects. You have an undo and a redo, which is honestly very much appreciated in something like this. And then you have your copy, paste, Control C and Control V. And undo and redo is going to be Control Z and Control Y, or Control plus Shift Z. I actually didn't realize that. That's good to know. Up here, you have a tempo finder, which is just a way to, if you have a song that you don't know the tempo to, you can tap it out and tap along to the beat. Let me pull up an example. So say, for example, I have a song I want, but I don't know the tempo of it. You could use this tempo finder and just tap along as you listen. Tap, tap, tap. And you can keep tapping as long as you want to try to get the best estimate. It looks like we're getting a 108 BPM. So you could just enter in 108 and then when you drag in your song, see if that's right. You don't have to use this tempo finder. You can also just use anyone online or just look up the tempo if it's already documented. And of course, once you found the song you want, you have the music select option, which is where you will load in your music file. I've actually got one here ready, and this is an OGG file, which I used by putting in the audio into Audacity and exporting as OGG. Also, while you're preparing your song, I highly recommend downloading Audacity for your Mac or PC, as it's a great way to quickly check and observe your audio file to make sure that everything is going to align and synchronize perfectly before you even load it into Heaven Studio. And the reason I love Audacity is because you can just plug in, and like this is actually the next song I want to make a remix with, so I just drag in that file, my audio file, which is an MP3, but it could be a WAV or whatever else you have. And then you drag it into Audacity. And this is a free program, so I'll leave a link in the description. But you don't have to do this. But what I like to do is take the zoom tool and just zoom into the very beginning of your song, or wherever you want the beginning to be. You might want to cut out the intro. I don't know. But whatever you want to cut out, see all this empty space here? That's gonna cause the song to not synchronize to the tempo in our Heaven Studio timeline. So what I like to do is just take the selection tool and click and drag from the first waveform and select all that silence. And then we're just gonna Control X and it's gonna remove it. And now if we save that or just export it, you'll have a version of that audio file without any silence at the beginning. I also recommend exporting as an OGG if you want to save significantly on your file size for your Heaven Studio remix. So we're going to do that with our audio. And I've already done this already for this song, so you would say yes. So now when I go to Music Select, I can open up my OGG file. And it goes to say also there is a song offset option here in Heaven Studio, which is why you don't necessarily need Audacity. You can also type in your offset here to compensate for the silence at the beginning, and you can type it in milliseconds. It's just that this method might require a more trial and error And using Audacity is just such a more surefire way to get started and not waste too much time fidgeting around with the offset and the tempo and scratching your head just trying to get the tempo to work. So that's why I recommend Audacity or any other audio program that you're comfortable with. While we're on the topic of music tempos, it's also no secret that some songs just don't stick to the same tempo. But if you really want to use that song in a Heaven Studio remix, there is the option to change the tempo. And that's down here in this tempo change option. And what this allows you to do is on this tempo bar with the tempo change tool selected, you can click on any bar in the timeline and it'll allow you to change the tempo up on that bar. And you can also, what's convenient is you have the option to double it or half time it, which could be really useful if you want the game to be faster or slower, but still synchronized to the song. So that could be fun to play around with. Or if it's just a different tempo entirely, then you can change it there. So if I want to change it to 130, hit enter and then out, and then you'll see that mark there. Keeps it at 130. But we need to get through the rest of these options. So there's also a search games option if I want to find, say, Crop Stomp. There it is. Or Lockstep. So that's nice and convenient. This is our games list, and you can sort them alphabetically by favorite. If you want to favorite a song, you can just right-click it, and that will favorite the song. And then once you right-click your favorites, click sort by favorite, and they'll appear at the top. There's also sort chronologically, which I think is sorted by their appearance in the franchise, which is kind of cool. So if you're only looking for Rhythm Tengoku songs that were on the Game Boy Advance, those would be at the top. And if you scroll down, you'll find some of the, like, I have Totem Climb here. That's a Heaven Studio original. And then you've got your Mega Mix tracks. And in between, you've got like Rhythm Heaven Fever and Rhythm Heaven DS. So that's cool. All right, we'll get to this top right section in a minute. But first, let's look at some of these play options. So you have play. Oh yeah, this is the song I added. Okay, that song is kind of loud. We can also turn down the volume of the audio that I uploaded, which I think I'm going to do now. So I click on music volume, and then you see this percentage. I'm going to turn that down to like maybe 75 right now. I've played a lot of remixes that don't turn down the music volume, and if the music is really loud, it will overpower everything else and you won't be able to hear the game's audio cues. So just be mindful of that. You may not have to turn down the volume. It just depends how loud your file is. But now when I play that, it should be a little quieter. You can also turn on the metronome. As you can see, mine is not synced right now, but once we set the tempo, which I believe when I tapped this out, it was, I don't remember. I think this one was 145. I'm also going to delete the tempo change from earlier, so I'm just going to right click and click delete. It's actually behind me, but just click delete tempo change. And that'll get rid of that. Also, the way I just zoomed in and out is by just scrolling up and down on the scroll wheel. If your mouse doesn't have a scroll wheel, you could also use these magnifying glass in the bottom left. And you also have a zoom reset. Hey, I forgot to mention one thing real quick, and that is the snap settings, the magnet button. And this is really useful for allowing you to snap to a faster beat. Wow, you can go up to 1/16. That's crazy. So if you were to keep it at 1/4, which is where it's at, like you can have this pattern where this pattern here is the fastest you can go. You can see if I try to drag this any more particular than that, you can't go any faster than that. But if we change the snap to 1/6, then you have more options to drag your notes. And you could do some crazy patterns. Like, let's just see what this sounds like. Okay, now that's getting into meme territory. That wouldn't be very humanly possible to play, but you get the idea. But you can also use it for, you know, just having more unique patterns. It doesn't have to be in wild succession like that. But yeah, super helpful to know. It's also helpful if your tempo is really slow and you want to get some faster notes in your really slow tempoed song. Then yeah, just bump this up to 1/8 or 1/16 or whatever. But for the most part, if you don't think about it and you don't need it, just leave it at 1/4 and you'll be fine. And to choose where the playhead is going to start playing, you just right click here anywhere on the timeline, but you have to click where these numbers are or it won't work. You can also hold it and drag it if you want to like drag it to beat 0. Sometimes it's easier to drag it than it is to click on beat 0 for some reason. Like here I'm clicking and it doesn't always work. So my solution to that is to hold down the right click and then drag it to beat 0 if you want to start from the beginning. So let's hit play here. Turn on the metronome and just listen for a while and make sure that the metronome is lining up to our audio that we prepared earlier. So far so good, right? You hear the metronome is ticking on time. You can also see that the vertical green line is matching up with each new beat to the song, so you have a visual reference. Okay, this seems pretty good. Now it's possible, like if you're guessing the tempo and you're not sure, like if I were to have guessed 144, it might sound good at the beginning, but it could trail off later. Like in this case, you're gonna wanna test it for longer than just 8 beats because the longer you listen, you see it starts to trail off. So it could require some trial and error. But don't be afraid to mess around with the tempo. If you don't get it right the first time, you'll find it. And if you're really having to fine tune the tempo, don't forget you can also type in decimals. So it doesn't have to be a whole rounded number BPM. You can also type in decimals if you're like, I'm almost halfway there in between BPMs. You know, try going for 0.5, 0.25, whatever you got to do. That might just be what you have to do. I don't know. So now that we got our tempo synchronized, our audio is loaded, we are ready to start dragging in games to create our remix. This is where the fun begins. So let's choose a game we want to add, and then every game has its own properties listed here in the top right. Now, each of these properties you can drag and drop to your timeline. Every minigame will have a switch game option. The switch game option is required for it to appear in your remix. So once you have a game you want, you can select its property by scrolling up or down or by using the arrow keys. And then whichever property is selected when you drag and drop, that is the property that will come into the timeline. So notice, if I am selected on bop, but my cursor is on switch game and I try to drag and drop, it's still gonna drag the bop setting. So just be mindful of that. It has to be selected with the cursor and the blue highlight for it to come to the timeline. And you select it using your scroll wheel or the arrow keys. So that's a little bit different than most editors, so something to get used to. So once you have it in and you want to take a preview, you can just hit play. And you can see they're bopping. All right, I just turned off the metronome there. So there you just have that's just a game scene. I think I'm gonna choose rhythm tweezers instead. So I'm gonna go to switch game and then you have that inserted. And every game has all these different options, which I'm not going to go in depth on each game in this video, but if you want me to take a deep dive into any of the mini games in a particular video, definitely let me know. For example, with rhythm tweezers, you have to start an interval because the interval is the length of your call and response, which is sort of a formula of some of the Rhythm Heaven mini games. And now I'm just going to select short hair and put some hairs on the timeline. Ooh. It's going to sound like that. Now, also what's important is while you're seeing how your remix sounds, you might want to turn on autoplay so you can hear how it'll sound as it's being played perfectly. Whereas if I turned it off, you would need to actually be playing with your controller for it to register. So I just leave autoplay on whenever I'm editing. And then if I want to play test it later, you can turn it off. And you can even go full screen mode. Make sure your controller is connected and then hit the space bar. And then you're actually playing your level. And then if you want to exit full screen, just tab. Just click tab and you're back to your editor view. But that's super useful to know that you can play test your level at any time without having to exit the editor. So that's cool. There's a couple of buttons we missed. So there's also the selection tool, which is kind of your default tool when you're not using the volume, the tempo change, or the markers. The markers are useful if you want to categorize your remix into different sections that will appear on the screen. For example, if I want to add a new section, I could put rhythm tweezers. And you can change the rating category, the input weight, and the start perfect challenge, yes or no, which is interesting because you could delay a perfect challenge into the middle of the song this way. The rating category I've never used before, but that might impact the weight of your score at the end. I'll have to check back on that one. As well as the input weight, I've never messed around with this before. I'm not sure if it's to like make the game easier or harder. I just leave this at 1.0 for the most part. I haven't seen any reason to use that yet, but if you have a reason, let me know in the comments. So we won't worry too much about that. And then I just right click to delete the marker. Honestly, I haven't used markers before in my remixes, but you're totally welcome to. And then you have remix properties, which brings up the whole new screen where you can type in all your data that will appear when somebody opens your file in the play menu, including the title, your name, your description. You can recommend a style of play. I just usually leave that with any. You can give a flashing effects warning, and you can tag it with any tags you want to add. And then if you want to credit the song artist, you can do that at the bottom here. And then you can even edit the ratings. What are these images? That's not the usual image you see on the default. They may have been left over from when I opened that one remix earlier. I don't know why they didn't clear. That might be a bug. I'm not sure, but yeah, so you can change the image for whether your player gets an okay, a superb, or a try again, and you can edit every piece of text. Who's judging you? What is their advice or their opinion? And then the result. So that's really fun. If you don't have to do this if you don't want to, of course, but it could be fun. Additionally, up here at the top right, you have the editor settings, which just brings up all of the game settings, including everything you find in the main menu settings. So most of this I don't really touch. I haven't touched many of these settings. You can play around with these if you like. And then you have game settings. The one thing I see a lot of people prefer is to have their timing display as single rather than dual. Just because it's easier to see the one bar in the middle rather than having the two on the outer edges on the right and left, which usually gets cut out in like a TikTok video or like a YouTube shorts or something like that. So I like to keep mine in the middle. Oh wow, I didn't even realize you could scale it. So that's completely customizable. And if you don't know what the timing display is, it's just when you're playing the game, you'll see little splashes appear off of the timing display bar to tell you when your beat is early or late or perfect. Here you have the controller settings. I have my DualSense plugged in, which you may have to manually come in and select if you plan to use it for playtesting. I know there's a lot of questions around which controllers work. Heaven Studio does have a controller guide set up on their Discord for laying out which controllers are currently supported and which are not, so you could find that. I'll link in the description if you haven't seen it already, because I know I do get a lot of questions about controllers. And then you just have credits here of all the amazing and wonderful volunteers who have put their time into this program. So shout out to everybody. But let's add some new mini games to our little remix here. So we'll just pick, say, maybe some Rhythm Rally. And I'm going to... Now look what happens here. You may be tempted to want to switch the game immediately after the tweezer section, but look what happens. I mean, you could do that, but then you wouldn't be giving the player the chance to actually play the phrase that you put down. So you would actually want to switch games on the 8th. So basically, whatever the length is of your start interval, you would want to save an empty space of time for the player to perform that action. So this is what that would look like. And then that plays out for them to be able to, for the player to be able to play the notes you've given them. So don't be surprised if you have empty spaces in your timeline where it doesn't look like something's going on. In fact, if you hit the play button before the interval, it's not going to do anything. And that's because when using the playhead, it's reading the properties in real time. So it's not going to read what's behind it. If you choose to play your level from beat 4, then it's not going to play the notes. But when you play it from the beginning at the start interval and with the short hair notes, and there was a little technical audio bug there, but if you just, now you hear it, then it'll show up in this empty space. And that's sort of just a quality to consider when using the playback. Make sure you're playing back to a point where whatever properties you want to be seen are actually being activated. So then we switch our game to another, and then this game has all of its own properties that you can drag and drop and test for yourself. And let's say I want to drag in, let's see, you'd want to start a rally. So let's start a rally and see what that does. Okay, so for this option, the rally option, there are certain properties that allow you to drag and drop the length. So you can drag this to go much longer if you want the rally to continue, or you can make it really short, only 1 or 2 hits. Not every property has the option to change the length, but if it does, you know you can if you try it. And then it'll just stop after it's done. But yeah, the most important thing is to play around, and not all properties will do something unless they're enacted by another property. So you may drag and drop something and you might not understand what it's doing. Like for example, this option was just an audio. Like that option just made the ting tong sound, but it didn't really do anything to the game. That's because it's just there as an audio cue. But if you actually wanted the rally to start getting fast, but then if you use the super fast rally option, it does the ting tong and the rally all in one with the warning time. So it's just like figuring out which options you need, and it's going to be different for every game, but I do believe you can experiment with it and learn as you go. And if you ever have a question, you can always ask the Discord, the Heaven Studio Discord, or you can ask questions in my Discord if you'd like as well. You know, we're all here together to help you understand the mini games, because it's definitely a lot to learn if you've never played the Rhythm Heaven games before, or you just need a refresher on some of these mini games, because there's a lot of them. All right, so right now I just opened up a game file of one of the songs I've done. And let's go over some more timeline elements real quick, because you have these tracks labeled 1 through 10, and it doesn't really matter where you drag your elements. It really makes no difference whether you put an element below or under somewhere. Like, it doesn't make a difference whether this is below or under a certain other element. Because of the nature of Heaven Studio, you're really only going to have one visual layer at a time. So you can kind of just organize them however you want. Like here, I have some of these flash elements like staircasing, but you could also just like put them on the same track if you wanted to. But once you have a song charted out and you like what you have, there are these 3 options here at the top that are not game related, but rather are some more options for you to customize your remix with. First you have the game manager, which allows you to end your remix. That's actually really important. when you get to the end of your remix, all you want to do is drag this end remix to where you want it to end exactly. You also have a skill star option, which is if you want to add a skill star note to your level. You can only have one of these per level, I believe. I actually don't know what happens if you add more than one. Maybe it just gives you more than one. I don't know. But typically you would just have one special note to be the skill star note. So like if I wanted to add that somewhere, like, I don't know, you could see that one go note became a skill star note, and that for you to hit the skill star, you would have to hit that note perfectly on the meter. So it would have to not be early or late. It'd have to be perfect note. That's completely optional if you want to add a skill star to your level. Something important I forgot to mention earlier is when you look at the properties of a game or in any other menu, you can see that a lot of them have this wrench to the right of them. If a property has a wrench, that means you can right click it once it's dragged and dropped and choose more options based on that. So that becomes really important for a lot of options. Like if I wanted to toss a Karate Man object, you could right click and have all these customizable options on which object do you want to toss and what do you want the success expression to be. And this is where the customization gets really deep, which is awesome. So definitely look around in the different properties and just right click to see what options you have to work with. Now, when it comes to visual effects, I recommend saving your visual effects as the last step in your remix creation, just so that you can have a focus on having a good charting and like having all your notes set up so that you have a fun level. And you can have a fun level without having to incorporate any special VFX. You don't have to go for this. In fact, for your first level, I recommend you don't even touch the visual effects. Just focus on making a fun level. But once you're comfortable enough to move on to adding some VFX, you can come over to this visual effects menu and you have a lot of fun options to mess around with. And I'm not going to go over everything because I'm honestly still kind of a noob at this too. But this is where you can start moving around the camera, angles, rotating things, adding filters, vignettes, screen shaking is another really popular one. So if I wanted to shake the screen of this remix, you would right click the option, and these have a start and end setting. Now, if you don't want it to change over a variety of time, like you can drag and drop it to have it go like from no shake to a lot of shake, or you could set it to instant and have that option change immediately. And that goes for any visual effects setting. But if you want to change it to linear, it'll just go in an exactly linear transition. But you also have all of these different options for the ease, which is sort of like the transition between. The most popular one is ease in out expo. This is just going to give you a really exponential transition of really fluent motion. I see ease in out expo used a lot, but that doesn't mean you have to. You just use that one. Especially for camera movement, you can also play around with some of these other ease options. And if it says ease in, ease out, or ease in out, that's just telling you if the effect is being applied to the beginning, to the end, or to both the beginning and the end. I know it's a lot, but like all of those options are lined up if you want to add it to just the beginning, just the end, or both. So I usually just go for ease in out expo whenever it's like a camera movement, something with motion involved that I want it to have a really fluid looking motion. So say for example, I want to slow zoom the camera into this working dough guy. Now notice if I start to move the camera, it doesn't show on the playhead because I'm selected on beat 0. But if I start to move the playhead to the end of the option, then it'll show you where your camera is actually going, and you can adjust it from there to show exactly where you want to move the camera. Say I wanted to like zoom it in just on this guy. Okay, not sure why you would want to do that, but just for example. Or if I want to make that transition a lot shorter, I could just drag it down. And then let's change that to ease in out expo, and you'll see the difference it makes in the movement. See how much quicker and snappier that was? It just adds a lot more fluidity to the motion. It's more exciting too than it is just like slowly zooming in at the same speed. So I could make that even shorter. So that's pretty cool. And then anytime you want to reset a property, just drag that setting in again and right click, and it'll have the default settings returned to you. And you can just choose an ease setting to get it to go back to normal without having to touch any other properties. So like now if I play this, it'll zoom in and back out really fast. And so just by these two elements, you got a nice little camera pan just zooming in and out, and you can do that for all sorts of things. You've also got options like the flash, which will just add a flash of any color. Like that. Which is funny because Working Dough kind of already has flashing in the background, but you could change this to any color. I'm telling you guys, once you get to diving deep into this program, like that's why I'm trying to keep this as a beginner's tutorial, because we could really dive as deep as you want. But I think a lot of the fun comes from once you understand the main properties of Heaven Studio, then you can start to deep dive in for yourself and discover a lot of the properties and options you have with the editor, and just have fun experimenting with what works, what doesn't work, and what you might take with you into your next remix idea. But yeah, this is actually one of the first levels I attempted to make. I don't think I ever finished this one. But so like that's really fun. Like with Second Contact here with the alien, I love this game. It's another case very similar to Rhythm Tweezers, where you have an interval, which is like a call and response. You have all these speaking notes, and then you have the empty space for the player to respond to those notes. And then you have a little success animation here. I guess the success animation is just the nodding of the head. Yeah, very subtle element. But some of those subtle elements can be like, can really elevate like the personality of your remix. Here's an example of a level I made with a lot more visual effects. You can see here I added the title card at the beginning, which is an option in VFX. I think it's just display song info. Yeah, so you would drag and drop that here, right click, and you can put in your info and it'll show up like a title screen for your level. So that's super cool. And then here I have all these different options that are set to instant for the color grading, bloom effect, and vignette effect, which you can see is like a pink shade around the borders. Once again, if you find a level you really like, I recommend just loading it into the editor and seeing how that creator made their level, because you might gain some insight or understanding into what worked for them. Just don't plagiarize and say it was your own level after that, because that's not cool. But yeah, once your remix is all said and done, you can go back into remix properties and update any of the info you want. Save that how you like as an RIQ file, and then you can share that RIQ file with anybody else to let them play your level. I highly recommend play testing the level yourself before sharing it with others, just to make sure that everything functions properly. And you might find yourself needing to make a few tweaks. That's totally normal. I definitely try to play test my own levels to make sure that everything feels smooth. There aren't any unhittable notes, which could appear sometimes. But yeah, this has been my basic tutorial of Heaven Studio. I probably missed some stuff, but I'll be sure to answer any questions that I can in the comments. But I hope that's enough to get you started in Heaven Studio. I hope you have a ton of fun making your own remixes in Heaven Studio. Hit the subscribe for more Rhythm Heaven and Heaven Studio content, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this helps.